In my previous video on protein synthesis, what we learned was the sheer significance of the DNA. For if there's any alteration to the DNA sequence, that slight change can go a long way in developing different and perhaps less efficient proteins. This permanent change in the DNA of a cell of an organism is called a mutation. Mutations that occur in body cells can change the primary structure of a polypeptide and subsequently alter the tertiary structure. These mutations could also mean that specific proteins are not able to carry out their functions or just not so efficiently. Another thing to keep in mind is that if these mutations do affect proteins controlling mitosis, they may cause cancer. However, these mutations will not be passed on to the offspring. In contrast, mutations that occur in gametes will be passed on to the next generation if the mutated gamete is involved in fertilization. A particular type of mutation is point mutation. Now I singled this one out due to its relevance in protein synthesis. A point mutation occurs when one or a small number of nucleotides are miscopied during replication. There are about 4 of its kinds, including substitution, deletion, duplication, and inversions. In substitutions, only one base is swapped for another, thus affecting one amino acid. This can be said the same for inversions. However, deletion and duplication both change the entire sequence of the amino acid sequence by either only one base from the sequence or a base being inserted twice instead of once. Now, in the broader scheme of things, these mutations can cause genetic diseases, as we mentioned just before, or they may just prove to be an advantage to an individual. For example, as a result of random mutations, insects can become resistant to insecticides. Resistant insects obviously have an advantage over non-resistant types when an insecticide is being used. They will survive the insecticide treatment and reproduce. The offspring will also be resistant, and so the portion of resistant individuals will increase generation after generation. This is an example of natural selection, an idea synonymous with Charles Darwin's infamous theory of evolution. However, there are ways to increase the rate at which mutations occur, such as by several agents called mutagens. And these mutagens include ionizing radiation such as ultraviolet light, X-rays and gamma rays, and chemicals including mustard gas and nitrous oxide, and many of the chemicals in cigarette smoke and the tar from cigarettes. So far we've covered mutations and how they change the DNA sequence to affect the organism. Yet there is another way by which organisms develop changes, which is through variation during the process of reproduction. Sexual reproduction in any multicellular organism involves the fusion of 2 gametes to form a zygote. The offspring from sexual reproduction vary genetically for multiple reasons. One reason is because of the vast variation in gametes, whilst another is because of the random way in which fertilization takes place. In humans, any one of the billions of sperm formed by a male during his life could potentially fertilize any one of the thousands of ova formed by a female. This means that every individual is likely to be genetically unique, with the common exception of identical twins. Identical twins are monozygotic since they are formed from the same zygote. When the zygote divides by mitosis, the 2 genetically identical cells formed do not stay together. Instead, they separate and each cell behaves as though it were an individual zygote, dividing and developing into an embryo. Because they have developed from genetically identical cells and formerly from the same zygote, the embryos and later the children and the adults they become will be genetically identical. Whereas on the other hand, non-identical twins develop from different zygotes and so are not genetically identical. Another misconception is that seeds do not experience variation due to their likeness with each other. Yes, they share similarities, though fall apart on other characteristics such as height. This occurs since plants, like humans, conduct sexual reproduction, with each seed containing an embryo which results from a pollen grain nucleus fusing with an egg cell nucleus. Embryos from the same plant will vary genetically because they are formed by different pollen grains fertilizing different egg cells and so contain various combinations of genes. Another form of producing variation is through environmental factors. A study conducted by Johann Gregor Mendel had two varieties of pea plants that were either tall or short and none with an intermediate height, with a difference in height due to genes they inherit. However, all the tall pea plants were not precisely the same height, and neither were all the short pea plants exactly the same height. Confusing, but there is a simple explanation for this occurrence: environmental variation. It could have been that certain environmental factors such as light intensity, the amount of carbon dioxide, and water and soil richness could have influenced the height of the plants. Similar principles apply to humans. Identical twins have the same genes and often grow up to look very alike. Although not quite identical, they might even develop similar talents. However, identical twins never look exactly the same. This is especially true if the twins grew apart. The different environments affect their physical, social, and intellectual development in different ways. So that's all for today, guys. I hope you're all doing well under the circumstances. Until next time.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good night.